Fair Play, a novel by Pete Fisher. Chapter 3, Folk Freaks. Tom was a bit of a freak, back when it meant hippie or alternatively cool. Martin was at school with Tom. It wasn't until they were around 15 that they discovered they both played guitar and liked a lot of the new heavy music. This led to them becoming buddies and hanging out together at weekends. Like Martin, Tom was always in trouble at school for having hair that was too long. He still let it grow as long as possible. His trick was to part it in the middle and tuck the side curtains behind his ears. This meant, however, that in his free time it looked like he was wearing a helmet, having trimmed his hair horizontally to the same length. His look was rounded off by an armed forces greatcoat and an LP clamped firmly under one arm. When Martin first encountered him, a whiff of patchouli oil would herald his arrival in any confined space. Martin was not quite as unconventional, but catching up. He'd also bought a greatcoat, a black heavy-duty fire service overcoat with brass buttons. It was at least a size too big. It would keep out the fiercest winter wind, but weigh him down until his knees bent if it got wet. Tom and Martin were an unlikely duo in some ways. They spent many evenings swathed in joss stick and cigarette smoke in Tom's bedroom, strumming guitars until they had the beginnings of a short set of songs that could be aired in public. Tom could render a Dylan song quite convincingly, and Martin had picked up a couple of blues standards, so all that was missing was a suitable venue. Tom and Martin boarded the bus out to the countryside with their guitars that evening and sat at the back, where they could have a quick rehearsal if it wasn't too crowded. Unfortunately, the bus filled up with passengers, so there was no chance to practice. They arrived at the pub and were waved in by the man at the door, their guitars as passports to its smoky interior. The Black Swan Folk Club was based in a tiny village about a half-hour bus ride out of town. Once a month on a Friday, they had a guest night session. Anyone could put their name down in advance and would be given a short guest spot. Tom had been out there to recce the joint and secured a spot for the next session. Strictly speaking, you weren't allowed to drink in a pub unaccompanied if you were under 18. But if you looked vaguely old enough, you got served. Tom had a deeper voice and looked older than Martin, so he went and got the beers in. Tom was impatient. "When do you reckon we'll be on?" "Oh, probably quite early, as we're new here." Martin was nervous. Tim was nervous too, but tried to hide it. They were both feeling shaky. Stage virgins. The MC was an accomplished fingerstyle guitarist. He opened the proceedings with a couple of impressive instrumentals. After that, Tom and Martin might have put their guitars away and got the next bus home, had they not been sitting right up front in full view of everyone. The place was packed, cutting off any escape route. Next was a trio of traditional folk singers performing a couple of songs a cappella. Two of them adopted the odd-looking finger-in-one-ear thing, ostensibly to maintain accurate pitch. The MC got up, clutching his clipboard. "Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we've got some new faces in the club tonight. This is their very first time at the Black Swan. A very warm welcome, please, ladies and gentlemen, for Tom and Martin." The two newbies got up from their table with their guitars and shuffled over to the makeshift stage. Two pallets nailed together and covered with hardboard and a couple of chairs. The audience managed a polite but distinctly unenthusiastic ripple. Tom and Martin did their best to tune up discreetly. Martin was far too nervous to play first, so Tom boldly launched into his Dylan cover. It was actually a thinly disguised heavy blues number, the kind of thing that had got Dylan into trouble with folk purists. It didn't seem to go down too well here either. Tom ploughed on regardless, but the silence at the end of the song was deafening. Martin had picked a slide guitar number, which meant retuning his guitar to an open chord. It ended up being more of an instrumental, as he'd forgotten the lyrics. He hissed at Tom desperately. "Do a solo!" "What?" "Do a solo!" Tom obliged. He pulled the proverbial rabbit out of the hat. He flicked a switch on a small plastic box sellotaped to the body of his acoustic guitar. He fired off a squall of notes that even took Martin aback for a moment. Tom's brother had devised an ingenious miniature amplifier-cum-speaker about the size of a matchbox. It sounded like a heavily distorted electric guitar, no louder than the acoustic guitar itself, but clearly audible. In a folk club where people sang unaccompanied and put their fingers in their ears, this was tantamount to sacrilege. A few jaws dropped and a couple of heads shook. Some people actually cheered. Tom's solo saved the night. The MC went up to the bar and returned with 2 foaming pints for the thirsty heroes. They gulped them down gratefully while smoking several cigarettes in succession to calm their nerves. The last bus home was about half an hour before the pub closed. Tom and Martin had to thread their way through the crowd with their guitars to get to the door. The 2 teenagers made a fitting picture that cold winter's night. They stood at the bus stop wrapped in greatcoats with the collars up, clutching their instruments in one hand and a cigarette in the other. It felt one step nearer the dream. The potato peeling machine rumbled round like a cement mixer. The potatoes rotated and fell like bingo balls in a shower of milky water. Melissa came into the back kitchen where Martin stood watching them. He was miles away. "Don't let them get too small, Martin. You know what the boss is like." Martin turned, looked at her, and smiled. Even in a waitress's uniform, she looked gorgeous. He called her Mel. She was his sister's best friend at school. Martin had a huge crush on her. She was 17, 2 years older than him. He'd known her for about 4 years now. Mel had always had very long, dark brown hair down to her waist. He found her incredibly pretty. Martin had begun to get a thing for her when she used to come round to visit his sister, Jane, on Sunday afternoons. He'd always wash his hair and put on his best shirt before they had tea together. He wanted to look his best. He persuaded his mum, against her better judgment, to buy him a garish paisley caftan shirt. He thought it looked cool. His school friends laughed the first time he wore it at a birthday party. Mel said it looked nice. She'd taken him to his first proper rock concert the previous summer. It was on the pier. She'd got the tickets and her dad chauffeured them there and back. Mel was petite, not quite as tall as Martin. He imagined some people might think she was his girlfriend. She looked stunning. Her miniskirt showed off her long legs. He felt so proud to be with her. The gig was the loudest thing Martin had ever heard. It was so loud it actually made his vision blur, and he felt slightly sick at first. He had to go out and get some fresh air. From further back, he watched the guitarist twirl his arm and conjure a maelstrom of ear-shattering sound with a tower of amps and speakers. The kids at school the next day asked who that girl was. This year, Mel had got tickets for a pop festival. It was on a racecourse about half an hour's drive down the coast. She drove them there in her little Austin A35. Martin was thrilled to see so many well-known bands in one day. He wasn't so thrilled that she'd got a boyfriend now. He came too. During a brief shower, they retreated to the car. Martin had never smoked dope before. Mel passed him a pungent joint of Afghan black, which her boyfriend had rolled. For the first time, he understood the word high. Suddenly, Martin noticed how small the potatoes had become. He'd left them too long. The boss would shout at him. The big industrial washing-up machine made grinding and swishing noises. Martin reckoned it must be nearly finished. He opened the door a bit too quickly to check. He got a shower of warm, dirty dishwater again. Mel had got him the Saturday job in the seaside snack bar. He did a 3-hour shift from 3 till 6. He had to clear tables, scrape the plates, load and unload the washing-up machine, and peel potatoes. It was extra pocket money, but most importantly, it guaranteed him 3 hours a week with Mel. It wasn't just a crush now. He ached for her. Martin grabbed every chance he could to snatch a few words with her. Mel was mostly chasing her tail, trying to serve too many tables, getting her bum pinched and being shouted at by the boss. She was always glad of a quiet moment in the back kitchen. Martin savoured every minute. He always got a free meal, so he would take his break when Mel did. They'd sit at an empty table together and chat. Chewing cheeseburgers never felt so good.